The gravel crunched under my tires when I pulled into my brother's driveway. My jacket still smelled like the cemetery, that particular mix of cut grass and damp earth that clings to you after you've watched someone you love lowered into the ground. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 32. A structural engineer by trade, single by choice after a relationship that ended badly 2 years ago, and as of 4 days ago, the younger son of a man I never fully understood until he was gone. My father, Raymond Cole, died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March. Quietly, alone in his study, the way he lived most of his life, working, thinking, planning things nobody else knew about. The plan that afternoon was simple. My brother Derek had offered his house for the gathering after the burial. Family, a few of my father's old colleagues, neighbors who remembered Dad from before he sold the hardware business. I was supposed to go inside, eat something I didn't taste, shake hands with people whose names I'd forget by morning, and survive the day. I parked behind Derek's truck. My hand was already on the door handle when I heard voices from the side of the house, sharp and low through the open kitchen window. I wasn't trying to listen. I wasn't even fully present. But something in my brother's tone made my hand freeze. "The attorney comes Friday," Derek was saying. "Once the will is read, it's over." "You're sure he never found out about the building?" That was Amanda, his wife. A pause. Then my brother's voice again, quieter, almost satisfied. "Dad never told him. Ethan didn't even know the business had that annex property." I checked. "He thinks all that's left is the house and the savings account." More silence. Then Amanda, "What about the storage unit? The one on Meridian? I went through it last month. Nothing useful to him. Some old files." I moved what mattered to my car already. I stood perfectly still. The gravel under my feet suddenly felt like it was shifting. "He's going to sign the estate consolidation form Friday," Derek continued. "He thinks it's standard. Once he signs, everything routes through the family trust, the one I control. The building, the land parcel, all of it." Amanda laughed softly. "He really has no idea. Ethan never paid attention to the business side of anything. That was always me. Dad used to say, 'Ethan builds things, I manage them.' A beat. Well, now I manage them without him." I took one step backward. Then another. My feet moved before my mind caught up, and I was back at my car. Sitting in the driver's seat with the door closed and my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles went pale. My father had always been a private man. He never talked about money openly, never explained his decisions. For years, I'd assumed he and Derek were simply closer in that way. Derek had worked the business side with him, had his name on paperwork, had been the son who stayed in Nashville while I took jobs in other cities. I had accepted that. I had never resented it. I thought I knew what that meant when it came to inheritance. Apparently, I didn't know anything. I sat in the car for 4 minutes. Then I pulled out my phone and called the one person I trusted with anything that involved documents and law, my college roommate, James Pritchard, now a probate attorney in Atlanta. He picked up on the second ring. "You busy?" I asked. "Just finished a deposition." "What's wrong?" "You sound wrong. I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be honest with me. If my father had assets that were never mentioned to me, a commercial property, a land parcel, and my brother had access to documents, could those assets be redirected without my knowledge before the will is officially read?" A long pause. "Ethan, talk to me." "I just heard my brother tell his wife he's been managing Dad's estate in a way that cuts me out. He's got me signing something Friday he called a consolidation form. Do not sign anything Friday." James's voice went flat and professional. "Not a single page. Tell him whatever you need to tell him. Stall. And do not let them know you overheard." "Can you do that?" "Yeah." "Okay, send me everything you can find. Any documents you've already received, any emails from your father's known attorney, anything. I'll have my paralegal pull property records in Davidson County by morning." I thanked him and hung up. Then I went inside my brother's house, ate a plate of cold pasta, and said nothing. That night, I lay in the spare bedroom of Derek's house because he'd offered and I'd accepted before everything changed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling. I thought about my father. I thought about the way he used to call me on Sunday mornings, always early, always when I was half asleep. He'd never said much. Just asked what I was working on, listened, told me to eat breakfast. It used to frustrate me. Now I'd give most of what I owned for one more of those calls. At some point around 2 a.m., I remembered something. 2 years ago, my father had come to visit me in Cincinnati. An unusual trip. He almost never traveled. We'd gone to dinner, and on the walk back he'd mentioned, almost offhandedly, that he'd set some things aside. "Just for you," he'd said. "Not mixed up with anything else. You'll find out when the time is right." I'd asked what he meant. He'd changed the subject. I'd let it go because that was how Dad operated. You let things go, or they just circled back louder. I sat up in bed. The storage unit on Meridian. Derek had said he'd already been through it. Already taken what he wanted. But my brother hadn't mentioned finding whatever Dad had set aside specifically for me, because if he had, he wouldn't be planning to hand me a consolidation form on Friday. At 6:15 the next morning, before anyone else was awake, I got in my car. The storage facility on Meridian Avenue was one of those places that looks the same at dawn as it does at midnight. Fluorescent lights, chain-link corridors, the smell of stale air and forgotten furniture. I knew my father rented a unit here because I'd helped him move some things after the hardware store sold, 3 years back. What I didn't know was whether he'd changed the lock combination since then. He hadn't. The same 4 digits. My mother's birthday. She'd been gone 12 years by then. Inside the unit, most of what I saw was what I'd expected: filing boxes, a wooden chair, the old drafting table Dad had kept from his first office. Derek had clearly been through it. Boxes were open, files were disturbed. But my brother was thorough, not meticulous. He'd been looking for assets. Documents with dollar amounts. Legal filings. He hadn't looked behind the drafting table. Taped to the back panel, the underside where the slope of the table met the frame, was a manila envelope. Standard size, yellowed at the edges. My name written in my father's handwriting, which looked nothing like a man who'd died 4 days ago. It looked exactly like him, steady and slightly crowded, the way engineers write. I sat down on the concrete floor of that storage unit and opened it. Inside were 3 things. First, a folded property deed, a commercial building on 5th Avenue North in Nashville, paid in full, titled solely to me. Not to the family trust. Not to the estate. To me, Ethan James Cole, with a transfer date from 4 years prior. Dad had moved it into my name while he was still alive. Second, a separate land parcel deed, 12 acres outside of Gallatin, same arrangement. Third, a letter. I unfolded it slowly. Ethan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I suspect your brother has already started doing what I was afraid he'd do. I want you to know I didn't set this up to create conflict. I set it up because I watched how Derek handled things over the years, and I made a decision I should have explained to you sooner. The building on 5th Avenue has a tenant, a small architecture firm. They've been paying rent for 6 years and they're good people. Leave them alone and they'll take care of the place better than any property manager you could hire. The land in Gallatin was where your grandfather had his first farm. I always thought it should go to you because you're the one who actually cared about those stories. Derek never listened when I told them. I moved both properties into your name before I got sick because I knew once I was gone, documents have a way of shifting in directions that benefit whoever holds the pen. I hope I'm wrong about your brother. But I loved you too much to gamble on it. Don't fight loudly. You were always better at building things carefully than tearing them down fast. Use that, Dad. I read it twice. The fluorescent light above me flickered once and held. I took photographs of every document with my phone. Then I tucked the originals inside my jacket, walked back to my car, and drove to a coffee shop 3 miles away where I sat in a corner booth and forwarded everything to James. His response came 18 minutes later. These transfers predate the estate. They're clean. The building and the land are already yours legally, unambiguously. Nothing to sign, nothing to contest. Your brother's consolidation form is meaningless as it relates to these properties. However, if he's already removed documents from that storage unit, we need to talk about what he took and why. I called him. He mentioned old files, I said. I don't know exactly what was in those boxes. Does your father's estate have a primary attorney? A man named Holloway. Gerald Holloway. He's handled Dad's official affairs for years. That's who's doing the reading Friday. Okay, here's what I want you to do. Call Holloway's office today, before Friday, and request a private preliminary meeting. Tell him you have documents relating to assets that may not appear in the estate inventory. Don't mention your brother. Just say you want to ensure the inventory is complete. And if Derek finds out I went to Holloway, let him find out, James said. You're not doing anything wrong. You're protecting assets that are legally yours. The only person who has a reason to panic is someone who was counting on you, not knowing they existed. I hung up. Outside the coffee shop window, Nashville was waking up. A delivery truck rolled past. A woman walked a dog. The world continuing, indifferent to whatever was dismantling itself in one family on the east side of town. I called Holloway's office at 9 a.m. His assistant was efficient and cool. She gave me a slot at 2 p.m. that same day. I didn't go back to Derek's house. I drove to the building on 5th Avenue instead. It was a narrow 4-story brick structure wedged between a coffee roaster and a parking garage, the kind of building that looks unremarkable from the outside and surprises you when you step in. The lobby was clean, the elevator worked. On the second floor, a frosted glass door read Aldridge plus Park Architecture, and through the glass I could see drafting tables and the organized mess of a firm that was actually using its space. I didn't go in. I wasn't ready for that yet. I took the stairs to the top floor. It was used for storage, the firm's materials, based on the labeled boxes, stacked neatly along the walls. But at the far end of the corridor there was a room that clearly hadn't been opened in some time. The lock was stiff. I used the key from the envelope. I hadn't even noticed it when I'd first opened everything. Small and labeled F5 top, taped inside the flap. Inside was a desk, a filing cabinet, and on the desk, a framed photograph of my father and me, taken at my college graduation, both of us squinting into the sun, my father's hand on my shoulder. I don't know where he'd gotten a copy. I didn't even know he'd kept one. I stood in that room for a long time. When I walked into Gerald Holloway's office at 2 p.m., I set the photographs of the deeds on his desk without saying anything. He looked at them for approximately 30 seconds, then looked at me. "Your father handled these transfers himself," he said carefully. "Through a separate firm, 4 years ago. I wasn't involved. Were you aware of them?" A pause. He mentioned, once, that he had made certain arrangements. He didn't give me details. He said it was taken care of. "My brother has been through my father's storage unit. He removed documents. He's planning to present me with an estate consolidation form on Friday, and I believe he intends to include all of my father's assets in a trust he controls." Holloway folded his hands. He was a careful man, the kind who didn't move quickly but also didn't flinch. "The properties you've shown me here are not part of the estate I was asked to administer. They were legally transferred out of your father's name years ago. Any attempt to include them in the estate inventory would be at minimum a significant legal error, and potentially something considerably more serious depending on how it was done. I want to understand what my brother may have taken from those storage boxes. If you believe estate documents were removed or tampered with, that's a matter for a probate attorney." "I have one," I said. "He's in Atlanta. I'd like him to be present on Friday." Holloway studied me for a moment. Then he nodded once. "That's your right." I thanked him and left. That evening, I returned to Derek's house for dinner because disappearing would have told him too much. My sister-in-law had made pot roast. My brother sat across from me at the table and talked about his weekend plans and whether the Titans had a shot this season and what Dad would have thought of the new stadium. He was relaxed, comfortable. He looked at me the way people look at someone they've already moved past. I ate the pot roast. I said the right things. I helped clear the dishes. At one point my brother put his hand on my shoulder in the kitchen, the same gesture my father made in that photograph, and said, "Friday's going to be hard, but we'll get through it together." "Yeah," I said. "Together." That night I texted James. He has no idea. Friday morning, James replied, "Good. I'll be there at 9. The following 2 days were the strangest of my life. I went through the motions, answered condolence emails, returned calls from my father's old colleagues, made arrangements with a funeral home about a headstone. All of it real. All of it happening alongside something else entirely, a parallel version of the week running underneath the visible surface. On Thursday afternoon, Derek texted me a PDF. "Just a formality before tomorrow, sign and send back tonight if you can. The consolidation form. 6 pages. Dense with legal language, the kind designed to look routine while doing something it didn't say it was doing." I forwarded it to James. He called me back in 11 minutes. This form, if signed, would authorize the transfer of all known and unknown assets of the Raymond Cole estate into a discretionary trust with your brother as sole trustee. It's written to capture everything, including assets that technically predate the estate, by using the phrase unknown assets. He's trying to sweep in the building and the land. He's trying to sweep in everything your father ever owned, whether or not it's legally part of the estate. Don't sign this. Don't acknowledge it tonight. When he asks, tell him your attorney wants to review it. He'll know something's wrong. He'll find out tomorrow anyway. Better, he's off balance. I didn't sign. I didn't respond to the text. At 10:47 p.m., my brother knocked on the bedroom door. "Hey, did you get the form?" "Yeah." I sent it to my attorney to look over. A beat of silence through the door. Then, "You have an attorney?" I called James Pritchard. "We've been friends a long time. He just wanted to look at it before I signed." Another pause. Longer. "Dad's estate is pretty straightforward. It's just to keep things organized." "I know," I said. "James will probably clear it by morning. Just being careful." He said goodnight. His footsteps moved down the hall. I heard him say something to Amanda in a low voice. I couldn't make it out. I didn't sleep much. But I wasn't afraid. Friday morning, at Holloway's office, I arrived at 8:50. James was already there, standing in the waiting room in a gray suit, looking exactly like what he was, a probate attorney from Atlanta who woke up wanting to work. He shook my hand. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. Derek arrived at 9:05 with Amanda. He saw James and stopped. A brief calculation ran across his face, the kind you can't hide when a situation is no longer what you thought it was. This is James Pritchard, I said. He'll be sitting in with me. Derek looked at James. I didn't know you were bringing a lawyer. It's standard when reviewing estate documents, James said pleasantly, especially with assets of this scale. We went into the conference room. Holloway read through the formal elements of the will. The house went to both sons jointly. The savings account split equally. The furniture and personal items to be divided by mutual agreement. Standard and expected. Derek nodded along with the ease of a man who had already done this math. Then Holloway set down the will and folded his hands. There are additionally certain assets not included in this estate, he said, as they were transferred out of Mr. Raymond Cole's name prior to his death. He slid a summary sheet across the table. A commercial property at 5th Avenue North and a parcel of land in Gallatin, Tennessee. Both titled exclusively to Ethan James Cole, transferred 4 years ago. The silence in that room had a physical weight. Derek stared at the summary sheet. His jaw worked slightly before he spoke. That can't be right. Those assets were supposed to be part of. He stopped himself. James spoke quietly. Part of what, exactly? My brother looked at me. For the first time all week, he looked at me like I was something he hadn't accounted for. Derek, I said, I need to ask you about the storage unit on Meridian. The color changed in his face. Slowly, visibly, the way a wall develops a crack, not all at once but in a sequence you can't stop watching. I went through it. There were some of Dad's old files. What did you take? Just paperwork. Nothing. I'm going to need a complete list of what was removed, James said to Holloway, and we'll need to verify that nothing removed constitutes estate property or was used to construct any documentation that was presented for signature. He slid the consolidation form across the table, Derek's form. Including this, Amanda touched my brother's arm. He didn't move. Holloway examined the form carefully. Then he set it aside with the particular deliberate care of a man who has no interest in touching it again. I'll note that this form was not prepared by my office and does not bear my authorization. Derek sat back. He wasn't angry. He was something worse. He was calculating, looking for a door, and finding them all closed. I didn't do anything illegal, he said finally. His voice was almost even. I was protecting the estate. You were never around, Ethan. You were in Cincinnati, then Denver, then wherever. I was here. I handled everything. Dad relied on me. I know, I said. That should mean something. It does, I said. It means you knew this business better than I did. You understood the assets and the accounts and the value of what he built, and you chose to use that understanding to cut me out instead of being honest with me. I paused. Dad knew you would. That's why he transferred those properties 4 years ago instead of leaving them in the will. My brother looked at the table. He didn't do it to punish you, I said. He did it to protect me from a situation he could see coming and didn't know how to stop. I thought about the letter. About I hope I'm wrong about your brother. I think he spent a long time hoping he was wrong. The silence held. James handled the rest methodically. There was no shouting, no threat, no ultimatum. The consolidation form was voided. An inventory of removed documents was agreed upon, and Derek would return anything taken from the storage unit within 72 hours. Holloway would oversee the formal closing of the estate on a revised timeline. Everything that was mine was already mine, the properties. The deeds, the quiet room at the top of the building on 5th Avenue with the photograph on the desk. Derek and Amanda left without speaking to me on the way out. Amanda kept her eyes on the floor. My brother paused at the door with his hand on the frame, his back to me, and said, "You could have just asked me." I thought about that for a moment. "You could have told me," I replied. He walked out. James and I sat with Holloway for another 20 minutes going over details. When we were done, James walked with me to the parking lot and we stood in the March sunlight for a minute without talking. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." "What are you going to do with the building?" I looked up at the sky. Pale blue, cold, the kind of light that comes right after winter breaks. "Leave the architecture firm alone. They're good tenants. Dad said so." I thought about it. Maybe clean up that room on the top floor. Make it a decent office. And the land in Gallatin? My grandfather farmed out there. I think I want to go see it before I decide anything. James nodded. He had enough sense not to offer advice I hadn't asked for. We shook hands. He drove south. I drove north. The land in Gallatin was 40 minutes from Nashville on a clear day, I found it by the address on the deed, a gravel road off a county highway, a gate with no lock, a field that hadn't been cultivated in years but was still clear, still open, still reaching toward a line of trees at the far edge that looked like it had been there 100 years. The grass was long and pale from winter. The ground was soft from recent rain. I walked out to the middle of it and stood there. There was no drama to it. No moment of clarity shaped like a movie. Just cold air and wet soil and the sound of a hawk somewhere above the tree line. I thought about my father, sitting in his study on Tuesday mornings, planning things nobody knew about, thinking ahead in the way of people who have spent their whole lives seeing how things go if you're not careful. I thought about the way he'd put his hand on my shoulder in that photograph and how I'd never known until 3 days ago that he'd kept a copy. I thought about my brother, too, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something more complicated. Derek wasn't a villain. He was a man who had confused proximity with ownership, who had mistaken managing something for deserving it. He'd been there and I hadn't. He'd done the work and I hadn't. In his mind, probably, he'd just been correcting an imbalance. The problem was that he'd done it in the dark, with forms I wasn't supposed to understand, while I was standing at my father's grave. I didn't know what would happen between us. I didn't try to figure it out standing in that field. Some things need more time than a week. What I did know was that the ground under my feet was mine. Not contested, not complicated, not dependent on anyone's cooperation or silence or goodwill. My grandfather had worked soil like this. My father had driven out here at some point and decided it should come to me. 2 decisions made by men in different decades. Pointing in the same direction, I took out my phone and looked at the photo of my father at my graduation, squinting in the sun. His hand on my shoulder. I thought about what he'd written, "Don't fight loudly. You were always better at building things carefully than tearing them down fast." I put my phone away. The hawk crossed above me and kept going. Over the tree line and out of sight. I stayed another hour, not because I had anything to do, but because it felt important to simply stand on this land and exist in it before I made any plans for it. Before it became a project or a decision or a line in a document. Before it was anything other than what it already was, a field in Tennessee that had outlasted everyone who'd ever claimed it, waiting quietly for whoever showed up next. When I finally walked back to my car, I wasn't carrying the week anymore in the same way. Something had shifted, not because I'd won something or proven something, but because I understood something I hadn't before. My father had spent years arranging a quiet protection for me, and I hadn't even known to be grateful until I nearly lost it. I drove back to Nashville as the light went low in gold across the highway. I had calls to make, details to settle, practical things that would take weeks. I had a brother I didn't know how to talk to, and a set of properties I needed to learn, and a life that had just changed its shape in ways I couldn't entirely see yet. But when I parked outside the building on 5th Avenue that evening and looked up at the 4th floor, the window of that room where a photograph of 2 people squinting into the sun sat on a desk no one had touched in years, felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not triumphant. Not righteous. Not even particularly settled. Just present. Like I was standing exactly where I was supposed to be, and the ground wasn't moving. That was enough. That was, I realized, more than enough. I got out of the car and went inside.